here. Let me just share the picture on the screen. Have you ever seen anything like this? So you can see this picture on the screen over here. Have you ever seen anything like this? Here's a shul. This is Simchas Torah in Eretz Yisrael. And we know we take out all the Sefer Torah in one particular place. Not sure where this is. Somewhere in Eretz Yisrael, in Yerushalayim. And they take all the Sefer Torah in the shul and they stack it up one on top of the other. Are you allowed to put Sefer Torah, stack them up one on top of the other? There are several times where you see that did happen, and I'll bring up some examples here on the screen. Here, there were 21 Sefer Torah, which were by the Kollel, which had to go into Geniza to be put away because of they were old, unable to be repaired. Here, the Nazis, okay, here's just many Sefer Torah together. The Nazis gathered, they destroyed and burnt thousands, probably tens of thousands of Sefer Torah throughout Europe. They also were planning on making a museum of the Jewish people. And they did gather hundreds and hundreds of Sefer Torah, and some in Frankfurt and some in Prague, in Germany. And this is in Frankfurt. There's a Jewish chaplain in the army, and he's gathering together. The Nazis took tons of Sefer Torah, they ripped them, they desecrated them, and they're just literally piled up one on top of the other. And here he's checking, there's a Jewish chaplain from the US Army checking some of the Sefer Torah that were found by the Nazis.
Oh, after World War II?
This is 1945. You could check this up. The details are well known.
Rabbi Judah Nadich, the chaplain.
Yeah. Here's another example. Another place where there's many, many Sefer Torah. And you see how the Nazis just threw them around, and you know how they desecrated the Sefer Torah. Sefer Torah piled up one on top of the other. And there's another picture of another place. Here's some of the Sefer Torah from the previous picture. They were brought to London and they were checked by Seferim. Some of them that could be used, and repurposed, some of them not. Here is Sefer Torah on different stages of repair or different stages of fixing or checking or writing. And here you see each one is labeled and each one has its thing. So you have Sefer Torahs here piled up one on top of the other. So can a Sefer Torah, is it respectful, or can you pile up? See what they do here in this shul, right? By hakafas. Are you allowed to pile up a Sefer Torah one on top of the other? Is it respectful? Was it ever done? Let's have a deep dive in the Gemara. And once we're on that topic, Gemara is going to infer, and we learn from there, can you put Sfarim one on top of the other? It's a famous thing, wherever you go, you have a pile of Sfarim, make sure the Chumash is always on top. Make sure the Tehillim's on top. Make sure the Tanya is on top. Is there an order? Can you put a Sefer Torah on top of Nevi'im and Ksuvim? Bigger question. Within a Torah itself, you have the Torahs rolled up one on top of the other. So you have one Chumash on top of the other at all times. Is that okay? So let's do a little bit of a deep dive into this Gemara, into this topic. Yesterday, we learned that which one is holier, a Beis Knesset, a Beis Medrash, a house of Torah study, or a house of davening. Which one?
It's a machlokes, right?
Right, and what's a halacha? Yeshua ben Levi, who says?
The Beis Medrash, right?
The Beis Medrash, a house of Torah study. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he saved the Beis Medrash, Yavne, and Chachamad, Yavne, and the sages, as opposed to the Beis Hamikdash.
Yeah.
Because Torah must be learned everywhere. If you don't have a shul, Yiddishkeit could still continue. If you don't have Torah, Yiddishkeit cannot continue. Yiddishkeit only, ein, as the Rebbe Sadia Gaon writes, ein umeseinu uma ella b'Torasei. What makes us a Jewish nation is not a Jewish state. It's not a Jewish culture. It's not Jewish food. What makes us a Jewish nation?
It's actually
Our
Torah.
Torah, only through our Torah. Says the Gemara 27a, and if you have an art scroll, you're in 27a1. I think the bottom of the first column over here. And the Gemara says, it quotes a Mishnah that when you sell an object, you can only buy something of higher holiness or at least of equal sanctity. The holiest object in a shul is a Torah. So if you sell a Sefer Torah, you cannot buy books of Nevi'im and Ksuvim. You cannot buy written parchments. You cannot buy a Megillah. You cannot sell a Torah and buy a Megillah. You cannot sell a Torah and buy a Sefer Yeshua written on parchment or Sefer Haftarahs. We're going to learn a very interesting halacha, which has very interesting ramifications for today. Hibayiluhu ma'u limkar Sefer Torah yashan nikach b'chadash. Am I allowed to take an old Sefer Torah and sell it in order to buy a new Sefer Torah? And it was asked the question to the people learning in the yeshiva. Now, the old Sefer Torah is still usable, but the new Sefer Torah will be nicer. Could I sell an old Sefer Torah in order to buy a new Sefer Torah? Now, here's the two sides of the question. Whenever you have the word ibai, it has a base in the beginning of the word ba'i, you always present two sides of the question. So, kiven dilay mali lahu mali lay aser. You're not elevating it to a higher kedusha, a higher holiness. You're just exchanging one Sefer Torah for another Sefer Torah. So since I'm not making it holier, maybe it should be forbidden, and therefore I cannot sell one Sefer Torah, an old one, in order to buy a new one. Dilma, or maybe even the leka la lule luli acharina, shaper dami. The highest you could go for a Sefer Torah is in holiness, in objects, is a Sefer Torah. So the only other exception would probably be the luchas, but that's not really available to be written by every Sefer. Right? So nothing holier than a Sefer Torah. So the question is, could I sell something of holiness and buy something of equal holiness? And if I Sefer Torah, you can't go higher, so therefore I could get a new Sefer Torah. Or maybe once it's holy, you cannot make it any holier at all. Answers the Gemara. Tashma, let's give the first attempt at an answer. And the Gemara will bring several attempts to answer this question. 4 or 5 different attempts to answer the question, but throughout all these answers, we're going to learn certain principles in halacha. Tashma avmachru Torah la yichru svarim. We learned in our Mishnah from last plot, which said that if somebody sold a Sefer Torah, you cannot buy books, written parchments of Nevi'im and Ksuvim. Svarim hudalai, which means you can infer from there that if I can't sell a Sefer Torah to buy another Sefer of Nevi'im and Ksuvim, which is less holy, but you can infer a Torah b'Torah shaper dami. From here we can learn that I can sell a Sefer Torah in order to buy a new Sefer Torah, because the only thing the Mishnah prohibited was to sell a Sefer Torah to buy Nevi'im and Ksuvim. So since the holiness of a Sefer Torah is the highest holiness which is possible in a physical object, therefore, from our mission, we can infer you're allowed to sell a Sefer Torah in order to buy another Sefer Torah. So Gemara answers, you're right. You could do it, but only masnisin. What's the next word? The Eved.
B'di'evet.
B'di'evet, after the fact. Ki kamibayilon lechet. After the fact, if the Sefer Torah was sold, then what should he do with the money? Buy a new Torah. Why was the Torah sold? Because the person never asked a shliach to a rabbi, never asked a question to a rabbi. However, people of the city and the board of the shul should not be going around selling Sefer Torah. Because the Sefer Torah is a holy object. It's not an object that you buy and sell on the marketplace. And if you're putting up a Sefer Torah for sale, by definition, it's sort of cheapening the idea of a Sefer Torah. You had, after the Hitnatkut in Eretz Yisrael, the disengagement when they took all the Jews out of Gaza 19 years ago, because strategically it'll be the safest thing for Eretz Yisrael, right? Exactly. And as we see today, those who said back then and saying now, the same exact things, the great danger you made to Eretz Yisrael and to the Jews there. And rightly, all the Jews in Gaza refused to leave. And so they sent the Israeli, on Tisha B'Av it started, and Israeli government sent the riot troops to disengage them, to forcefully remove all the Jews from their homes by force. And some of the things they did was to take, many things went missing. Many objects went missing from people's homes, ended up on eBay in Israel. Don't ask what happened over there. But one of the Sefer Torah from one of the shuls were missing. And where was it? Who was it? About 2 years later, showed up in Sotheby's. Somebody, meaning one of the soldiers who were doing this engagement, or commanders probably, stole the Torah, wanted to make money off it. And right away they made a big, in court, they brought up something in court, and the Torah disappeared. I don't think it ever got back to its original owners. A Sefer Torah is not an object of buying and of selling. A Sefer Torah is a holy, is an object of sanctity. You don't sell a Sefer Torah. If it was sold, then you have to buy a new Sefer Torah after the fact. So from this Mishnah is no proof if you're allowed to go ahead and sell a Sefer Torah in order to buy a new Torah. Next, Tashma, come in here, another answer that we could give if we can sell an old Sefer Torah to buy a new Sefer Torah. We bring from a Brisa an interesting din, which says Goylelin Sefer Torah b'mitpachos chumashim. A chumash is one single chumash, one single book of the Torah. And they also used to be written on parchment as a single chumash, and that has less of a level of holiness than an entire Sefer Torah, which is 5 chumashim put together. Now, there's a cover of a Sefer Torah, a mantle for a Sefer Torah, and there's a mantle for a chumash. Which one is a higher holiness? The mantle of a Sefer Torah, because it's used for a Sefer Torah. The cover of a single book of the Torah, a chumash, is not as holy because it's just one book of chumash. So it says, it's Brisa, Goylin Sefer Torah, b'mitpachos chumashim. You can take the cover of a chumash of one single book of the Torah and upgrade it, and now use it as a cover for the entire Torah. Again? You could upgrade the Torah cover. If it's a cover of only one book of the Torah, let's say you have only Chumash Bereshis written on parchment, and it has a Torah cover on it, you could upgrade that Torah cover and to a cover for a Sefer Torah of the entire Torah.
When you say Torah cover, what?
A mantle, like the velvet cover by Glila, the Kollel puts it on top of the Torah. Yeah, mantle of the Torah. You could bring a picture on the screen if needed, but yeah, one of these, right, the mantle of the Torah. So you could take the mantle of a chumash, something which is not as holy, and use it, upgrade it to become a mantle for a Sefer Torah of all 5 chumashim together, and so on. What's holier, the Torah or Nevi'im or Ksuvim?
It's actually the Torah.
Torah comes from Har Sinai from Moshe Rabbeinu, and Nevi'im and Ksuvim come later.
The Torah is holier than any book you can conceive of.
Correct. Right? Chumashim mitpachos Nevi'im and Ksuvim. So you can upgrade the cover of a Sefer Haftarahs, a book of Haftarahs, and upgrade it to become a cover of a Chumash, of the 5 books of the Torah, or of the entire Torah. You cannot take the cover of a Chumash and downgrade it to become a cover of a book of the Nach, of the Nevi'im or Ksuvim, because it's less holy. As well, you cannot downgrade the cover of one of the 5 books of the Torah. You cannot downgrade a mantle for the entire Sefer Torah to cover just one Chumash. Says the Gemara, Katani miyas goylim Sefer Torah Mispachas Chumashim. We did see that you are allowed to take a cover of one book of Torah, of a Chumash, and to use it as a Torah cover for the entire Torah. But Bachas Chamashin in comes out to be that you're allowed to cover it with the cover of a Sefer Torah. Mitbachas Sefer Torah loy, but you cannot use it as a cover of a Sefer Torah. Just put the place over here. So the Gemara brings a proof from here that if you cannot even use one cover of one Torah to cover of another Torah, for sure you cannot sell one Torah for another Torah. Right? The Brisa just said you could use a cover of one book of Chumash to be used for a Sefer Torah. But it doesn't say anything about using the cover of a Sefer Torah for another Torah. If it doesn't say that, you could infer that it's forbidden. And if you cannot even use a cover of one Sefer Torah for another Torah, then for sure you can't sell one Sefer Torah to buy another Sefer Torah, because even the covers cannot be used. Halacha, are you allowed to do it or not? You're allowed to use a cover of one Sefer Torah and another Sefer Torah. If something was set aside for a particular Torah, for a particular object, there's a machlokes rishonim if you're allowed to use it for another Torah or not. The Ritva, the Rashba, Sfas Emetz writes, and in practice, it should be forbidden. However, the minhag is they're not strict about this. Everybody does it. They use, they're not really strict. The cover of one Sefer Torah to another cover of a Sefer Torah. And so he says that being the people are not so strict about it, you must find a way in order to say that's not such a bad idea. And he finds a proof from one of the Gemara, which he says that perhaps it'll be permitted from the Havamina. The fact that Gemara says maybe it's permitted based on the Brisa, you could say it's not such a big deal. But in practice, people are not really strict about this, of taking the cover of one Sefer Torah to cover of another Sefer Torah.
Maybe actually because people are used to the idea, oh, you can do it. So it's like they have it dedicated, really. This is only for this Torah. It said they said this is only for this Torah. It's a usual thing, but it's like it's like would be actually switch for later circumstances. Maybe actually it says depend upon actually the intention you given. So I mean, right. How much are you dedicating this cover to this Torah? Maybe it could involve that.
Yeah. Perhaps, yeah. Yeah, maybe. We're going to soon see there is a time when you're allowed to sell a Sefer Torah. So obviously, when it's life and death, you're allowed to sell a Sefer Torah. But you're going to see even at a different time when it's not life and death, where you're allowed to sell a Sefer Torah. We'll see that. But the Gemara didn't bring that yet. You cannot sell a Sefer Torah to buy another Sefer Torah. There's only one physical object that's holier than a Sefer Torah that we have nowadays. You know what that is?
What?
A Jew.
Oh.
And a Shama. And a Jew learning Torah is more important than a Sefer Torah. We'll get to that soon in the Gemara. Says the Gemara, let's look. The Gemara rejects this proof because we made an inference to say that one is not allowed to use one Torah cover to another Torah cover. And for sure, one cannot sell a Torah to buy another Torah. The Gemara says, a Mesechta, look at the last part of this Brisa. It says, Sefer Torah. You're not allowed to take a cover of a Sefer Torah, of 5 books of a Torah, and put it on top of a chumash, a single book of the Torah. A Torah b'Torah, shapir dummy. You can infer from there the opposite. Meaning you can't take a cover of a Sefer Torah and put it onto a single chumash. But a cover from one Torah, you can put it onto the cover of another Torah. If you're making inferences, you're learning from what they didn't say, you could learn the opposite from the beginning and from the end. From the beginning of this price, it sounds like you're not allowed to use a cover of one Torah to another. From the end, it sounds like you could use a Torah from one to the other. So at any rate, this is no proof from here if you're allowed to sell an old Sefer Torah to buy a new Sefer Torah. So Gemara will bring now another proof. Tashma. Manichin Sefer Torah agabe Sefer Torah. We bring a proof from another brisa, which says, sort of like the picture we saw previously, one is allowed to pile up Sefer Torah one on top of the other, to stack them up, if you have no other way of putting them down. Best is to have them standing upright. Best is to have each one on its own shelf. But you have no choice. You are allowed to stack up Sefer Torah. As the Brisa states. Torah gabe chumashim. And then it gives an order of which Svarim are holier than the other one. Which Sefer Torah, of all 5 books of a Torah, is holier than one book of a Torah, and you can put that on top. Chumash a chumash goes on top of a nach. And you cannot put something of a lesser sanctity and lesser holiness on top of something of greater holiness. The fact that the holiness is greater means that you cannot degrade it by having something of other holiness putting on top of that. So a Sefer Torah is equal in holiness with another Sefer Torah, and we said you're allowed to put them one on top of the other. Now, if you cannot change a Torah cover from one to the other, then you should only say you can't put them on top of each other because one is holier than the other. The fact that you can put them up on top of each other, and I'm sure the order switches around, shows that they're equal in holiness. And therefore, I could sell an old Sefer Torah to buy a new one because from here we see that they're equal in holiness. The Gemara says, Anacha ka'amrat. Can you possibly bring me a proof from halacha of placing one Torah on top of another Torah, or one Torah on top of a chumash, or a chumash on top of navi? Shiny anacha t'layefsher. Really, you should not be putting Sefer Torah on top of each other. You can only do it in a situation where it's impossible otherwise. If you would say that it would be totally forbidden to put a Sefer Torah on top of each other, how is it possible to even roll up a Sefer Torah? Right? There's a Sefer Torah that's rolled up, and in any given week, one parsha is on top of the other. Correct? Because it's rolled up. Now, is it physically possible to have every Sefer Torah laid out entirely?
Well, physically, but
physically, it wouldn't even fit into this room, right?
Yeah.
It probably wouldn't be that good for the health of a Torah either.
Yeah.
Every word and every line is exposed to the elements. So the only reason that a Torah is allowed to be sewn together and rolled together is because it's impractical otherwise.
Then we infer further.
From there we can infer further.
Where it's impractical, therefore you have.
And you have one on top of the other. You have one parchment rolled up, it's on top of the other parchment. And that's called galila. Galila, it means rolling. And from here, it sounds like the Nevi'im and Ksuvim are the same because you have a book of Nach and they'll be together. That means Nevi'im and Ksuvim could be rolled up one on top of the other. That's what you can infer from here. Alakiv delay efsher. However, since it's just not practical, or rather say it's impossible to have the Sefer Torah any other type of way. Sefer Torah can't be like a book that you roll, that you open up. And even if it's a book, if it's not being held up right, then it's one on top of the other. Shadi. So therefore, they permitted it because it's impossible to have the entire Torah open.
Or the Sephardi Torahs are standing up in the cover, though.
Correct.
Oh, yeah, but if they're not in the cover, you have the same situation. Yeah.
Right. Hachanami, and so too, when the Torah is being written, definitely was one on top of the other. Hachanami, kivin d'lo yasher, so too, when you have many Sefer Torah, and it's impossible to have the Torah as in any other way. Shadi, it would be permitted, right? I've been in some very old shuls where there were at least a ratio of one Sefer Torah per person in the shul. I got to some of these shuls of Simchas Torah, and every single person in the shul has a Torah to hold. Every visitor in the shul has a Torah to hold. And these are old Sefer Torah, and each Torah is very heavy. Plus, many of the people in the shul are older, and they're literally holding the shul together. And it's impossible. Many people don't want to hold the Sefer Torah the entire kafas. It's very heavy, and it's not easy. And therefore, they put the Sefer Torah down on the bima. So in times when it's impossible, otherwise, then it's permitted. But to go ahead and to say that I could sell one Sefer Torah to buy another Sefer Torah, that we can't learn to permit from here. The fact that a Torah could go on top of another Torah, we have no choice in the matter. And we do it every time. Every day we read a Torah because the Torahs are rolled up one on top of the other. But to go ahead and to beginning to sell one Torah to buy another one is forbidden. Okay, maybe we'll do the next. We'll do a little bit of this tashma today. We'll go a little bit more in depth today because it's my apologies. I started later than usual today. Let's go into a little bit of the halacha. Can I put one sefer on top of another sefer? A book on top of a book. It happens all the time. People go into a shul, you see a chumash in the middle of a pile, you grab it out. Hopefully the pile doesn't come crashing down. Many people are makbid. If you have a Tanya and other Sfarim, they take a Tanya out. Also, because Tanya is on a very high level of holiness. So they say they shouldn't be under Sfarim. We put a Sefer Torah from a Gemara. We learned a Sefer Torah goes on top of a chumash goes on top of Navi goes on top of Ksuvim, and not the opposite way around. Rabbi Yehuda says in Mesechta Baba Basra, the Nevi'im go by itself, Ksuvim go by itself. The Chaim say each book of the Nach really should be by itself. When do we daven and we bring in psukim of Torah, Nevi'im, and Ksuvim? 2 days a year. 2 days a year we daven, and we quote 10 psukim from we have 10 psukim 3 times, 10 psukim, 3 from Nevi'im, 3 from Torah, 3 from Nevi'im, 3 Ksuvim, and once more from Torah. Malchi is Zecharinas and Shofars. Right. We have words from the Torah, Nevi'im and Ksuvim. What comes first? 3 psukim from the Torah, then 3 from Nevi'im, 3 from Ksuvim, and then we conclude once again with 3 verses from Torah. On Tisha B'Av, we have a Haftarah. It's from Yirmiyahu. And we also say a few psukim from Yirmiyahu is Nevi'im. Then afterwards we say a few psukim from Ksuvim. So the Nevi'im comes first. So which one has greater levels of holiness? Which one is holier. The Ramah writes, Moshe Israelish, the pasuk for the Ashkenazim.
Here's my uncle.
Correct. He says that a Torah always goes on top of Nevi'im and Ksuvim. If you do have a book of Tanakh together, then they could be together. But otherwise, a Torah should always be on top. And therefore, he was very, very strict that you shouldn't have a Chumash with Pirushim in it. Like we have today.
Yeah.
A Chumash with Rashi, a Chumash with Targum. Because what's happening is that you have a Chumash and you have a Targum. So, and let's say your Chumash is like this. The Targum on page 1, 2, 3 is over the Chumash of the later pages.
Are we talking about the Ramah?
Yeah, there must have this. And he says, really, you should be strict about it. But he says, unfortunately, I guess, it's already so widespread that everybody does it. Nothing I could do about it, and let it just continue.
Maybe also you could have actually that when you have in the old days, actually, when you had the Torah Nevi'im, the Ksuvim in scrolls, so the whole thing was actually scrolled. Nowadays, you automatically, when you're talking about in terms of a book,
right? Let's say take your art scroll right now, right?
Yeah.
So you have Hebrew on one side, English on the other side, and the English is over the Chumash.
Plus, also you have actually the covers, right? Say, right, these covers also actually introduce the question because we have something actually, that's automatically it's not pure.
Right. So the Ramah says, since it's impossible to really regulate such a thing, so within one volume, it's not a problem to have one on top of the other. Not in one volume should put a Chumash on top. So here comes the next question. You have many Siddurim. You have a Siddur there. That Siddur, that green one, does not have the Torah reading of Mondays and Thursdays and Shabbos Mincha in the back. It doesn't have it. Take another Siddur. It has a whole Tillim in the back. And it has Torah reading for Mondays and Thursdays.
Yeah.
So we said within one book, you can't be strict about it because it's one Sefer. And that's sort of impossible to regulate. But could I put a pile of Siddurim? Could I put a Siddur that does not have Tillim in the back and does not have the Torah reading on Mondays and Thursdays? Could I put that on top of another Siddur which has a Tillim, which is part of Tanakh, or has the Torah reading on Mondays and Thursdays, which is Chumash, right? It's called the Chumash, a single volume. So can I put that on top? Can I put one Siddur on top of the other Siddur? If this Siddur has parts of Torah and parts of has Tillim part on top of that.
Let's see what's there.
So he's not sure. He doesn't end up with an answer. He doesn't have the answer. So the Aruch HaShulchan, you know what that was? Epstein. He lived in Russia actually. He was close to the Tzemach Tzedek. He comes up with his own sort of novelty, and halachically we don't really follow so much this thing today. But he says that the only chumash which has kedusha is a chumash written on parchment.
That's what I was thinking. It's a possibility.
But a chumash printed in a book does not have that same level of kedusha.
Actually, that's what I think. It's a possibility because look what's happening. You're already tampering it with the proper kedusha by having this cover on top, right? Whereas actually in the old days, you had simply scroll the entire thing.
But imagine such a thing. In that case, there's no sanctity of one book over another book. Meaning, I could put my, Encyclopedia Talmudis, which is a book of Torah, and if it's on top of a chumash, you don't have to be makbid about it. Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, the big place I lived recently in Eretz Yisrael, he says that the words of the Aruch HaShulchan were not accepted by the wide swath of Torah Jewry. And therefore, we should be makbid that a chumash should be on top. In a siddur, I've not really seen people being strict to put one type of siddur on top of the other type of siddur, but it's definitely that we are strict to not to put a chumash on top of Nevi'im or Ksuvim, and Nevi'im or Ksuvim on top of other Svarim. Now that we see that there's a hierarchy, how far does this hierarchy extend? Does this hierarchy only apply to Tanakh, words, for that was given by the Nevi and by the prophets, by Hashem? Or does it also extend to later poskim? For example, I have a Gemara. Could I put a modern day Pirush, can I put it, or even a Rishon, can I put a Ritva or a Rashba or a Kollel Eretz on top of a Gemara? Gemara is written by the Amirayim, and this is written by the Rishonim. Could I put something written by Rabbi Kiva Eger? Can I put that on top of a Rishon, on the top of a Ritva? Until which point does it extend? Can I put Sichas on top of a Gemara? Can I put a Gemara on top of something else? So to what point does it extend? The Rabbi Tzvi inspector, heard of him?
Yeah, indeed.
Where is he Rav? In which city?
Kovna, right?
Very good, in Kovna. So he, fascinating, I have his book at home. It gives you a really good insight into the Russian Jewish community, the plight of the Russian Yidden in the 1820s to the 1880s. He had a secretary named Yaakov Lifshitz, who was a very big helper of his. And this Yaakov Lifshitz, of course, was very connected to all of our Rebbes, the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Rebbe. And so he has a 3-book volume, 3-volume series, which I have it at home. It's old print, but it's fascinating to read. It's fascinating to learn. So he says that Rabbi Tzvi inspector was very strict not to put any Rishonim, any Achronim on top of the Rishonim. Right, and be careful not to put any Rishonim on top of a Gemara. He would keep this level of hierarchy up. So the other modern day Achronim, they would say that it's a very novel, it's very noble thing to do, to give honor and sanctity and to give kedusha to something of a higher holiness of a previous generation. However, in halacha, you don't have to be strict about it, except what we were taught. What we were taught was only for books of Tanakh. More than that, you don't have to be makmum or strict about it. If you want to, tavei lecha bracha, should have many brachas come onto you. The Trumas Hadashen, also
Ancestor.
an ancestor of yours.
Yeah, because another is
So Dovi, if it's your ancestor, then you got to start keeping this one.
His Rebbe was my uncle, and I'm descended actually from the Lord's sister.
Right. And so he, in his yeshiva, he one time gave a drasha saying, I see Bachram putting the Tosfos, wasn't always printed in the same Sefer, or the Rishonim, Marsha, I see them putting it on top of the Gemaras, and you're ruining the Gemaras. And that was not him. One of the Magidi Shurim in Yeshiva said that. So they brought it to him, and he says, it's not a problem. He says, because when it was written to begin with, when it was printed or written to begin with, printed with having that in mind. When the Gemara is printed, it was printed having in mind that you have another Sefer on top of it. You do see from all of this that the fact that there's so much back and forth and discussion is that Sfarim have Kedusha, have holiness, and they're very holy, and therefore you have to respect the Sefer. And you look at a Sefer, it's not just putting it away, it's not putting it on the floor, it's making it, you have to make it the holiest thing in the house. When the Rebbe says to have a bayis mali Sfarim, a house full of Sfarim, it means that you're bringing Kedusha into your house. When the Sfarim were stolen from the Frierdiker Rebbe's library, and the Rebbe spoke about it in public, saying you're taking a piece of the Frierdiker Rebbe, because his entire being was a Sfarim, was a Torah that he had. If you're in a shul and it's practical, if you're in yeshiva and it's practical, then you're allowed to have Sfarim piled up one on top of the other. The Magen Avram, the Mishnah Berurah, all agree in this thing. You are allowed to pile up Sfarim one on top of the other. There's no hierarchy. There is a hierarchy. The Bach writes, Magen Avram writes, in regards to tefillin. The Bach writes that your tefillin bag should be very narrow, and you should put the shel yad further in and the shel rosh further out. That way, you should always take the shel rosh before, because the shel rosh has more kedusha, more holiness than the shel yad, and therefore you should place a tefillin in a position that you're always going to touch the shel rosh first, the one with the higher kedusha. Because if you touch shel yad first, you have to take it out.
That's the way it works, and you take out the yad first.
Sorry, you say, correct.
But
He says,
we don't hold that, wait, do we? Because we put on the shal yad first, right?
Right, you take out the shel, but he says if you touch the shel rosh, if you pass over the shel rosh, then it's a problem because you're passing over something of kedusha. It's not such a it's not such a I say major isser when it comes to these things. When it comes to shayat rosh, Shulchan Aruch has to be makbid. But when it comes to Sefarim, the main thing is to learn them and then to ask questions later. In the yeshiva in Morristown, talking about the 1980s, when the 1990s, it would be the Rebbe with many weeks would be Megillah, would edit Likutei Sichos, and a Sikha would come out Thursday night or Thursday afternoon. They would get a copy of it, and then two Bachrim from the yeshiva, they would go around with a shopping cart throughout the yeshiva, go through every single footnote, Maramakim, on the bottom, fill up a shopping cart with all the svarim of all the footnotes, and then learn the Sikha, checking up every single source, and they would learn it the entire night and go through it till the next morning. So you understand the shopping cart. There was in Kfar Chabad, someone which learning yeshiva in Kfar Chabad, and there was a certain Sefer which came out by a certain Pesach, which was a very controversial Pesach, a very controversial person. And there was a young yeshiva boy who was a very hot-headed, zealous yeshiva boy, and he was on the. There's a big